Hey, what's up YouTube? Bill Faulkner with Faulkner Custom Rods, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, one of my favorite tools in the shop, the versatile spatula. I was first introduced to the spatula by the late great Ralph O'Quinn, who custom made a double-ended spatula for me with one side for finish and one side for rod bond back in about 1995. Ralph actually handmade these, and he even engraved my name in it, which makes it a very personal and dear keepsake to me. But I'd never heard of one, never seen one, and immediately upon using it at Ralph's recommendation, I saw the value of it, and I've been using them ever since. So what do I use it for? If you've watched the other videos, then you know, first of all, it is my favorite tool in the shop for mixing finish. It is absolutely perfect for mixing your epoxy finish or epoxy glue, liquid glues. It's also my preferred tool for applying guide foot finish. And if you watch the guide foot video, you know it's what I use to put on both coats or all coats when I'm applying guide wrap finish. It's very, very useful for that, and to get a very clean, very straight edge, very consistently around your guide wraps. And finally, it's by far the best implement, maybe the only tool to use when mixing rod bond and other paste type epoxies. Just absolutely irreplaceable in the shop. I use mine for everything, although I do use slightly different shapes, which we'll get into. So just a highly recommended tool that I have no idea how I would live without. So let's talk about what you're going to need to make your own, which is what this video is all about. So first and foremost, you're going to need a spatula. And what we're looking for is a dental cement spatula size 24, model 24 or 24A. They are widely available. You can find them lots of places. But the key is an octagonal handle. They also make them with a round handle. They're much more useful with the octagonal handle. Full disclosure, a proper instrument that is surgical grade and autoclavable and everything will not be cheap. They are 20, 22 bucks a piece. They are worth every penny. And if you can get a 24A, that is the thicker, less flexible model. To me, that is preferable. But you can also find them. I recently found this place, Widget Supply. They sell them really cheap. They're a little small and they're a little soft. It's cheap, probably Pakistani stainless. But at 2 bucks a pop, you really can't complain. So once we have our spatula, we're going to need to do some shaping of it, and then we're going to need to polish it up after we do our shaping. So if you see these two spatulas, the one on the right is from Widget Supply, exactly as it comes in the mail. It's kind of got a rounded end and blade. And the one on the left is after I have reshaped it. And so what we're going to do is, depending on the shape you want, for both a finished spatula and an epoxy mixing spatula or paste mixing spatula, we're going to square the end off. And then if we're going to use it specifically for finish, I like to add a little bit of taper. So to shape it, I prefer to use a bench grinder. Here I've got my Delta sharpening center, and I just typically use very light pressure on the fine white wheel on the left. Doesn't build up too much heat, and you're really not needing to take off too much metal. Ironically, when you use a higher quality US stainless steel surgical grade implement, it takes a little more work to grind it. But the soft Pakistani gadget kind of hobby ones, Widget Supply hobby ones grind very easily. But if you don't have a grinder, you can also use whatever you might have used to shape and polish guide feet. If you missed that video, please go back and watch. But any of the stones you can use to shape and polish guide feet will also work to shape your spatula. Once you're done shaping it, you're going to need to sand it and kind of dress it and polish it. And I like to do this going through a progression of grades of sandpaper. I use the same sandpaper I use to fix butt wrap finish, if you watched that video. So 180, 220, 320, 400, 600, and then maroon Scotch-Brite and the fine gray Scotch-Brite. It does pay to use a high quality paper-backed product. You can either wet sand or dry sand. I just dry sand. I don't go to the trouble of wet sanding typically. And then once we're done shaping and sanding, we need to polish it up to a high shine. And so I like to use the wire wheel to kind of deburr immediately after grinding before hand sanding. And then you need a cloth buffing wheel. And anyone will do. This one's about 3 inches in diameter, I think, but you can use smaller or larger. And then finally, you're going to need some buffing compound. Lots of things will do, just anything that's made for putting a high gloss mirror finish polish And the one on the left is specifically for metals, but the one on the right also works even though it says it's for non-ferrous metals. Just this steel is pretty easy to work with. You're just going to want to polish it to a very high shine. And then finally, in full disclosure, this step is optional, but I like to dip the handle in Plasti Dip. It just really makes it comfortable to use, and if you use a bright color like the yellow that we're using in this video, it also has the added benefit of making your spatula very easy to find on your workbench, and it just it's a nice finish to it. It makes it feel like a very professional quality tool. Alright, so here's our widget supply spatula, and we're going to start working. First thing we're going to do is just square off that tip, and always wear proper eye and hearing protection when working with power tools, including a grinder. But ultimately what we want is sharp corners, so we're going to round off those round corners just a little bit on the tip. And then we're going to start grinding the sides. And forgive me for, I had to do a little one-handed camera work here. I didn't have any help. All I'm trying to do here is I'm not trying to take any material off the back of the blade towards the handle. I'm just trying to take it consistently off the tip so that I wind up with a taper. So full disclosure, if I was making one just for mixing rod bond or liquid type epoxies like blade bond, I would not do this part. I would only square up the tip, which you saw me do at the very beginning. But what I'm doing now is adding a taper to it. And generally, I kind of want that tip to be about as wide as the smallest guide wraps I'm going to be finishing. So if you're finishing really small snake guides on a fly rod, you may want to go with an even finer tip than what I've ground here. This is sort of a general purpose, kind of universal size that works very, very well for me for most of what I build. Of course, you can always turn the spatula if it's too wide for the wrap you're finishing, but do whatever works for you. But you do want to keep very square corners at the tip because that really helps you scrape the bottom of a cup and be very precise with putting it on around the edges. So just taking a look here, we're really close. So you see we've got some even taper on both sides from the back to the front, and that's looking pretty good. I'm going to take just a little bit more off. I think the key is rather than forming a compound or curved shape, you want to keep a very straight line shape on both sides because that's what makes it really useful to scrape the edge of your cup when you're mixing finish, right? And I think we're about done. So just checking it here, we got a good square tip. I'm going to sight down it and see that we've got good straight parallel edges, and we're ready to deburr this thing. So now to deburr this, we're going to use the same wire brush that we used in our guide wrap. Our guide foot shaping and polishing video, and all I'm trying to do with this is just take that hard edge off where I ground it. I don't want to round it off too much. I don't want to take too much of the mirror shine off of the blade that we didn't shape. I'm just hitting those areas where we ground it because it can have kind of a curve and a sharp, rough edge. So I'm just going to hit all those areas we ground, and I kind of hit it sideways, and now I'm hitting on the very edge of it back and forth and up and down. And you can feel with your hand pretty well. You're just checking to make sure, I'm looking to make sure I've removed the burr. And you don't have to do too much. As soon as it has no burr or sharp edge, you're done. Just for reference, this is what we've got at this point when we finish this step. Above, you see we've got the original widget supply spatula that's kind of rounded and has parallel edges. And once we're done shaping and removing the burr, we've got a narrower tip and very straight edges that taper from the heel towards the tip. And again, that's key to helping us scrape our, finish mixing containers. Now for the hard part, although the hard part isn't very hard, we just need to sand by hand. And so starting with the 180 grit, I'm going to start working just on the long parallel edges of this spatula. I will very quickly hit both sides, and all I'm doing is kind of removing grinding marks and brush marks, and I will hit the very end and both edges of the end, but I do not hit the corners. I want to keep them sharp. So now we're going to go with 220 and the same thing. I'm going to kind of get that whole edge, make sure I remove the sanding marks I created with the 180. Doesn't take long, doesn't take much pressure. This is gentle hand sanding. And then I'm hit the tip. Again, I do not round the edges with the 220 grit. I'm just keeping it really square. Now we're going to move to the 320, same thing. And as you go through each grit, and you'll see this, you generally have to sand a little bit longer with each finer grit. But if you look at the marks you created with the prior paper, you're just kind of going to sand until those are gone and you get uniform kind of trails or marks from the paper you're using. Again, just hitting that edge, keeping it very square. And I'm catching the edge of the tip, but I'm not touching those corners. I want to keep those corners very square till later in the process. Checking the work, looks pretty good. You see, we keep, that is the part, that specific corner you want to keep sharp. Do not sand that down and keep this sharp. Just makes it easier to use. Now, you can round them off if that's what you prefer, but for what I'm doing with it, I prefer to keep those corners sharp through this point in the shaping and sanding. Now we're down to 400, and when you're talking about polishing metal, 400 is pretty fine. And you see it's sort of glossing up and looking shiny already, and that's good. We're going to hit that edge, feel it. We're going to hit the other edge. At this point, it should be really smooth, very defect-free, no burrs, no dig marks, no tool marks, no grinding marks. Going to hit the very end again. Kind of round that end a little bit. And you may find it helpful as you get finer to hold it vertical and use it almost like a pencil on a firm surface to sand. And there we go. It's getting really, really close to done. Very gentle. If I drug it across a cotton ball, it wouldn't pull. It wouldn't make a run in nylon, right? Now we're using 600. And at this point, using the 600, we're going to hit the long sides, just like we've been doing. And I'm kind of rotating the spatula gently to get all sides of it while mostly keeping it square. We're going to hit the very tip again, but now we are going to hit those corners. And really, we want to keep them sharp. We're just kind of deburring them. There could be a little sharp spot there, and this is 600 grit. It removes very little material. Just kind of barely hitting that corner so that it stays square, but is a little bit rounded off and won't drag bubbles and things like that as we mix. And again, this technique of holding it vertical and using it almost like a pencil works pretty well. You can also do the same thing with the long sides if you want. Just removing the burr, just till it's really smooth to the touch. And now we're gonna just hit that tip a little bit. That's kind of the business end. You just really want that smooth and even and uniform. And now we're gonna go to the Scotch-Brite, and I'm using the burgundy or maroon Scotch-Brite first. And it helps, to me, it helps to double it over, and you gotta be kind of careful you don't catch it on the edge. And I am applying a little bit more pressure here, but just enough to get some action and to begin to remove some grit. And you're just kind of gently rotating the spatula and hitting it with the Scotch-Brite. And same thing with the tip. It's a little tricky to get the tip. You kind of just have to go one way. And then finally, just a final finish, and probably don't even need it on this one. It's very, very smooth. And again, these widget supply spatulas are pretty cheap, and they, you know, the flip side of that is they shape and polish pretty easy. And that's it, we're done. And you see it's very smooth and very even, but we're ready to go to a final mirror polish now. And so we're gonna go back under power to get that done. So again, as a reminder, you wanna always use safety glasses, eye protection, ear protection when using power tools. Here we've got some of our metal polishing high gloss compound. We're gonna turn this buffing wheel on about 2,500 RPM. You want a pretty high speed, and I'm just very gently touching the compound to the wheel. It doesn't take a lot. That's probably more than I need. And now I'm going to begin to polish. And if you've ever done this kind of polishing or not, the key is you don't go at it really hard. The harder, the more pressure you apply, and the more you kind of make the spatula dig in, the less good result you get, right? So the fastest way to achieve a really high polished mirror shine is just to go gently, right? So I'm very gently, very light pressure, like you would maybe tap a child on the shoulder to wake them up. It's very light. Oh, and I lost it. It's so light, my grip is so gentle that it flew out of my hand, but that's fine. And so we're just working around. You can see when you look at the spatula, those areas that are mirrored and those areas that you've sort of disrupted the finish in the process, and we're just gonna hit all of them. So I like to hit both edges on both sides from both directions. Handle right, hit both edges, and then handle left, hit both edges. And then I like to actually put the edges in, and you see the compound was green when we put it on, and now it's kind of gone black, and that's where polishing material off. That's metal that's loaded onto the wheel from the polish as a result of the work that we're doing. And as you can see, it's already pretty mirrored and shined up, but we're just very carefully, whoops, flew out of my hands again, sorry. Very carefully, you're trying to get that bevel. So you want to have a mirror edge all the way around, from the flat blade all the way around the corner onto the square edge and all the way onto the other side of the bevel and blade. So again, you just kind of hit it from all angles, and I'm hitting the tip and just really trying to make sure I get every area. And this wasn't very polished. These widget supply spatulas aren't that polished, so I'm kind of just hitting this part, which is the only part that's not going to be covered in Plasti Dip if you decide to go that step. So just everything that we're going to use, you can see very polished, very high shine. Got a little bit of area at the tip on that one side that I need to work on, and a little bit on the edge, but very, very light pressure, 2,500 to 3,200 maybe RPM, and just very, very gently polishing with light pressure until I get everything. And you can see I've got a sharp edge, but there's no burr. It doesn't catch. It wouldn't tear paper or a cotton ball. It's very smooth, but we still maintained a sharp 90-degree angle that's going to let us scrape the bottom of our finish cups. And so this very final bit here is just really kind of getting the tip and then really kind of blending the areas we've polished into the blade. On this one, the spatula actually didn't come to me polished as high as what I've done with it. And so I kind of had to hit the blade a little bit, even though I didn't sand there. So now what we're going to do is you need to clean this up before you use it, because that compound, and it's kind of like sanding dust, but it's very fine. It's just that black stuff that you see on the wheel there. So I've got a paper towel here. This is just a Costco paper towel wetted with isopropyl alcohol that I keep in a spray bottle. And I'm just, sorry I got off camera a little bit here, I'm just wiping it down. You just want to keep it really clean, and hit the handle too before we Plasti Dip it. You just want to make sure the whole thing is clean and free of any contaminants, any sanding dust, any sanding debris, any polishing compound that's left on there, and just get it nice and cleaned up. And really, we're good to go. That spatula is ready to work. I just think they benefit from the final step of putting Plasti Dip on the handle. So here's what you got when you're finished. You've got a highly polished, well-shaped spatula with some taper, with very straight sides, that's going to be very useful for applying finish. Again, if I was going to use it just for mixing, I'd just square the end. And here we've got our finished spatula. Again, it's ready to use right now, but we've got a good polish to that edge. And you can see the edge we're going to use to scrape our mixing cup or our mixing surface is really polished, but we've kept pretty sharp square edges. Or square edges, they're just not sharp. They've been polished and rounded. So now, if you want to go the extra step, let's Plasti Dip it. And to do that, I've double over a section of masking tape, about 6 inches of masking tape over the blade. And then I actually punch a hole in it. And then you just follow the directions on the can of Plasti Dip. You're going to open it and generally dip it in at a rate of about 1 inch per 5 seconds is what they recommend on the can, but there's a lot of room for error. I go a little bit past the knurled grip section and onto kind of the shaft of the spatula. And then you're going to pull it back out. You're moving something like 1 inch every 5 seconds. And I find this process oddly gratifying. You may find yourself Plasti Dipping a lot of stuff in your shop if you're like me. But again, that's it. That's all there is to it. Now we're just going to hang it from that hole and let it dry. I think the instructions are you can recoat it within 30 minutes and wait 4 hours before you use it. I generally like 2 coats. I will sometimes go 3, but never more than that. And then really the final thing that I do is you can wind up with a little bit of a sloppy edge up at the tip, and I like to just trim it back with a sharp razor blade so that I get a very professional looking square edge to the Plasti Dip right where the knurling ends. And that's all there is to it. We have our new custom built, not bought, finish spatula. So you see 2 shapes here. The one on the left or on the top is what I like again for finish application. And the one on the right with the squarer blade and the parallel sides is what I like for mixing rod bond or mixing liquid type epoxies. You see you've got a really nice finish to the Plasti Dip handle. They look great. This is something you can not only use every day but be proud that you made. And I think it goes without saying, but you can use whatever shapes you want. There's an infinite number of shapes you can use. You can get different color Plasti Dips. Again, I like a bright color because it helps me find the spatula on my bench top. And then the only other lookout that I'd give you, I think, is they do need to be polished again from time to time. So you see the one in the middle looks a little, cloudy. You can always repolish them, and I recommend you do that from time to time. And then if you're going to use the Plasti Dip, that stuff will go bad in the can. It's got hot solvents. You need to use it with plenty of ventilation. And when you go to store it, I recommend you vacuum seal it and store it in a refrigerator so it doesn't go solid on you in the can. But hopefully this was helpful. Please let me know if you got any questions. Appreciate your watching. Please like and subscribe. And until next week, thanks for watching.